last video. Ella is no longer in the room. I really want to read my chart with her in the room. So just in case something comes up that she probably shouldn't be privy to, because obviously we get quite deep. Let me just see where the chart reading is, this page. Okay, so, wait, there we go. There's my chart. Okay. So I'm going to give you a minute to have a look at my chart for a second and see if you can find Uranus, just so that you can recognize it on your own. Just give you a minute there. I did give you a clue as to the sign Uranus is for me earlier. I don't know how well you were listening to that, but can you see it? And I also described the glyph as a stylized H. Can you see it? I also said I was in my Uranus opposition, and the oppositional sign is Taurus. I'm just giving you a few different ways to orient yourself with the chart, just for practice sake. So let's jump in. Okay, here's Scorpio at the bottom. Here's Uranus in my chart in Scorpio at the bottom, and Taurus directly above it at the top. And here you can see this green one over here. Those are the transiting planets. I'm just going to remind you this. I think we've discussed this before, but your natal chart or your birth chart is your blueprint, and it's always the most important thing to be going back to. Whatever you're uncovering and learning about in your astrology, if you start becoming aware of what's happening with the transiting planets or what are progressions or any other thing, it always comes back to the natal chart. So what we've been looking at is understanding it in your natal chart and just getting to understand a little bit more the planets, and whilst we explore a little bit about angles and maybe the signs, etc. But always coming back to the natal chart. But I think I have mentioned to you that the planets, if you see it like this, and I don't usually show it to you like this when we're doing it, but if you see it like this with planets on the outside like this, that is the transits. So you can see it's transits for the 5th of February 2024. That's now when I'm filming this. So then we could go down in my chart and say Uranus was at 17 degrees of Scorpio in my natal chart when I was born. And in the transiting chart, Uranus is at 19 degrees of Taurus. So it's actually 2 degrees away from being directly opposite. I know, because I've been following it for a while, that it's not going to be coming back into exactitude. It's not coming back all the way. It's just stationed direct, which means it's never going to get right back to that point that it was at for me last year, which was pretty explosive. It's also because it's a slower transit. Oftentimes it'll vacillate quite a bit over a point. So in that Uranus opposition, which is, as I said earlier, a big transiting point for us, we have what's often called the midlife transits. And for that, we would look at when Pluto, so here's Pluto in my chart, at 16 Libra. When Pluto in the sky was at 16 Capricorn, that's a Pluto square. Pluto square itself in your chart, that's one of the midlife transit points. The other one is when Neptune at 18 degrees of Sagittarius for me was at 18 degrees of, here's Neptune now, was at 18 degrees of Pisces. It was squaring itself. That's a midlife transit point. After you've gone through those, they are not at exact times the way that we can look at the Uranus opposition or a Saturn return. They're a little bit more fluctuating, again, because they have much slower, longer cycles, and depending on what sign, because the orbit, the time spent, because of their unusual orbit, the time spent in certain signs is different. So we don't have an exact, but it usually happens that you have either your Neptune square or your Pluto square. One of them will come first. They may come simultaneously. It may be the opposite one first for me, as it was for you. And then not long after that, you hit your Uranus opposition. And those three are known as your midlife transit points. So, and maybe even you could put your Chiron return at that, but that's 50. Now that is more of a midlife point, but traditionally we weren't living as long as we were. Okay, so Uranus opposition, I'm still in it, but the intensity of it has passed. Okay, so that's one thing to note when you're looking at it. So now if we're going to say, where is the sign my Uranus is in? We're going to say with that chart, we're going to say it's in Scorpio. What house is it in? It's in the 3rd house. Remember now, we're going to see who this planet is talking to, who it's making aspects with. And it's got quite a wide opposition to Mars. And although they don't draw aspect lines unless you specifically put it in astro.com or Astrodienst, but it would also have a wide opposition to Chiron, both of those two planets, because it's kind of falling in between the two. It also has a square, a wide square as well to Jupiter, and it has a very tight trine to Mercury. So trines are happy. And if we think about how I said that Uranus is like a higher expression of Mercury, I have my Mercury in a water sign, which means in a sign that is nurturing and nostalgic, I think in a way that I'm like, how can I help other people? How can I support others' emotional health and well-being? I mean, you can see how I've incorporated that into my work. We can always, you might see something different. You might say to me, but couldn't that Mercury in Cancer say that you are a bit of a smotherer and you try to overcare for everyone to stay in control? Yes, we could say that too. So there's lots of different ways we can say it. And I'm not trying to avoid saying some of my more shadowy traits, but because we're talking about quite a nice trine conversation between Uranus in my chart with Mercury in my chart, I'm just thinking how that nurturing nature of Cancer, it's in the 11th and 12th house. So it's me wanting to work in groups and maybe for mental health. 12th house can be mental health. Mercury can be mental. So mental health. And then also Uranus is the bigger experience of that. But interesting, Uranus is in the 3rd house. And traditionally, Mercury rules the 3rd house. Not in my chart, but traditionally Mercury would rule the 3rd house. So the 3rd house has very mercurial or Gemini type things. It's about your day-to-day trips and communication, like with people that you see every day. So the people that you live with in your home or the people that you go to work with, going to your grocery store, knowing your neighbors, your siblings, your cousins, people in your close environment. That's Uranus. So here, because I have Uranus in this sign, there is already another sort of mercurial link. And those are also the spaces in which Uranus is going to be most impactful for me. So that could say I could act out in a Uranian way, which would be I might be the person that shocks my siblings, that changes the paradigm of my neighbors. I've definitely been that person. I mean, my Port Alfred neighbor is not like me at all, but I've smudged her and her husband and her children, and they've all come to appreciate the odd card reading and crystals. Having gotten to know me, that was outside of their paradigm. Okay, so I've changed my neighborhood, one might say. I've changed minds. I've expanded minds in that way. So I have acted in a Uranian way. You may also say that because this is my birth chart, so this is oftentimes my expression, but if I'm not expressing my birth chart, then often it comes from outside of you. So then we might say, I had a run-in with a neighbor, or I had an issue with a sibling. I mean, there was one time when I had an issue with my sister, actually, when we were younger, and we didn't talk for 6 months, which is totally unlike me. And she's a Scorpio, and that more came from her because she wasn't happy with me. So there was a sudden severing. Scorpio can be known as severing. Sudden is Uranus, the sudden severing of this really important bond. I mean, Kerry's my person. I'm actually going to go see her in the UK in April. So she's my person in the world. And so that was very difficult. And there was a sudden severing. That's keywords for Uranus and Scorpio. But then thankfully we came back together. So that was a short-term thing. That's another thing about the 3rd house. 3rd house can be short-term things. With regards to the opposition here, I have just trying to think how to word this. I think for me, my Mars is uncomfortable. We've talked about this before. My Mars is kind of stubborn, and well, so anything in a fixed sign is stubborn, and this is also a fixed sign, of course. So my Mars is kind of stubborn, and it doesn't really love being in Taurus. It's struggling to get the momentum. Uranus often across the chart will usher this jolt of lightning that'll help to get my Mars moving, like light a fire up my Mars's butt, which my Mars will probably appreciate after he's gotten all peed off and turned around and been like, you just, how dare you, whatever. But suddenly he's moving where he got stuck in sedentary. So you can see that that can be useful. I actually wanted to just point out quickly here. So 17 degrees in a fixed sign. Remember, Leo is a fixed sign. And even though I don't have a planet at 17 degrees, 15 degrees is my rising degree. You can also use the software if you go to the expanded chart to like I said, there wasn't a line between Chiron and Uranus. There's also not a line between my ascendant and Uranus, but you can put those in. I haven't told you how to do that, and unless you're really playing with the chart, you probably won't easily find it. But just to note that for yourself, always think, well, is a planet making a close connection to one of the angular houses? Remember, your angular houses are by these dark lines: the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house. So I've already told you how planets on these dark lines, like in my case, my Mars, those are very strong because ostensibly that's a conjunction. Remember, a conjunction is two planets together, and a planet on a very strong angle is a conjunction, the planet to the angle. So we would look at squares and oppositions of that as well. And here we have a very strong square between Uranus and my rising sign. So here again is another nod to how I might show up in a way that shocks people. So there's a lot in my chart that could talk about where I'm the good girl archetype, and I try to do things by the book and not ruffle any feathers. And that is unfortunately has actually created a lot of dis-ease and imbalance in my life and in my body over my life, because I definitely can look at my early conditioning, my ancestral conditioning that brought me into a space of don't stand out, don't be too loud, don't be naughty, don't this, don't that. And I try to do those things. But Leo, in a healthy environment, is much more gregarious and confident and queenly and big hair, or whatever the case may be. So if my Leo was stifled, then I wasn't naturally shocking. Whereas now, it feels weird to say that I'm shocking, but really being me, I can be shocking because not everybody understands. It's my language, my way of being is becoming more mainstream, but this is kind of who I've always been, even before I understood that that was okay. So my self-esteem was being very impacted. Pluto in Libra in the second house, my self-worth, my value. There was power plays about whether I could step into my power, whether I can earn an income doing what I do, being who I am. How will I allow myself to see my worth in and around those topics? Okay. And here we have Uranus forming this tight square with the exact degree point in which I shine, saying, you're kind of born to communicate, third house, and to spread around in your small environments, closer to home, to come out and be who you are. And if you don't do that, this is where you can see things either express kind of from you out or from out in. So if I don't do that, which for many years I didn't do that, then the Uranian jolts of lightning come at me in a negative way. So I stopped eating, or I had depression, or I turned into somebody who wasn't who I was because I thought that that's what other people wanted, and I was shrinking into myself. So the attacks felt like they were outside of me. People were attacking who I was. I was attacking myself from the inside. I couldn't be who I was. Now, as I step more and more into that, I become the person that walks into a room and people go, oh, I don't know about what she thinks about that, or oh, what does she mean she's going to clean the energy in the room, or she's holding cards, or she has crystals, and that is shocking for people. It's hard for me to even say shocking because I've been doing this for so long. It feels completely benign to me, but I'm aware that to some people it's not benign in the sense that I don't believe that my tools are magical and powerful. I completely do. I just don't see anything malignant in them. And I'm very aware that some people do or are scared because they don't know. And that is a space where I can be the shock factor that walks into the room. The other thing about Uranus in the tarot is it's the 0 card, which is the Fool. So Uranus is almost like that jolt of lightning that says the hero's journey has begun. You're starting a Fool, you have no idea, you don't know the tools, but here you go. And I also often talk about the Tower card being one of those Uranian things. So if we're having a big Uranus transit or something, it feels like a tower moment. And the Tower card is like, burn it down, burn down the tower, and then we'll rebuild. So it's like something's got to change. So for me, because Uranus, with those energies in mind, forcing me to do the work, forcing me by shocking me out of myself. Almost think of a defibrillator. When the heart stops, Leo is the heart, and the defibrillator comes and goes, boom, boom. If you want to live, you've got to fight for it. And you can't just lie down and die. You have to go on a journey. You have to become your own heroine. And that was something that has many iterations for me, and indeed for most of us. I mean, that is a true story for all of us in our own personal way. So I think that's all I'm going to say about my Uranus for now. I don't really want to talk into what I feel like my cultural thing is, because there's probably more than one of us with a Scorpio Uranus, and I feel like I want you to play with that a little bit yourself. If you don't, we'll talk into it when we get there. I don't actually have anything specific. I might have to play with it myself anyway. I haven't got something off the cuff. I mean, I can come up with a few ideas, probably relatively easily. Just for example, I might say something like Lumo ski pants, what are those things called? Leg warmers. Like, that was a craze when I was young, you know, that probably came in the sort of 80s stuff. But I'm already 17 degrees and I'm born in 79. So Uranus would have moved in earlier. So there may be something from earlier that I would also want to look at and have a little feel into what was newly trending and a little bit unusual when it first started that became very commonplace. So I hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to connecting with you. The new moon is on Saturday. What is that day? Saturday, let me tell you, the 10th. So I was thinking for us to meet on Monday the 12th, but I will confirm that on the WhatsApp messages, and hopefully that will work for everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and we're really coming to the end of a whole cycle. So next month is Pisces season. That's the end of a cycle. And we will be doing Neptune, which is also the end of the primary planets. We didn't do Moon, but for those who were with me we did the nodes instead. For those who were with me in Red Tent, you know the Moon quite well. I would love some feedback on whether you would like to continue. And I have some definite ideas around that, which I would love to discuss with you. We're a small group, so we can really lean into what we're wanting to dive into next. If we want to jump in with a little more juiciness, we could spend some time delving into the elements. So looking at where our fire signs are and how many planets we have in fire signs, water, earth, blah, blah. We can do the modes. So looking at fixed, cardinal, mutable. We can look a little more deeply at our angles to understand those lines that we're talking about and where they're easier and where they're more challenging. We can also start to look at the asteroid goddesses, which is going to take you into a deeper understanding of the psyche of the sacred feminine, because of all the 10 planets that we've looked at, only 2 of them have a feminine energy, which is Venus and the Moon. And when we go into the archetypes of the asteroid goddesses, we're doing Juno and Eris and Lilith and Vesta and Ceres. I think there's another one. So those are also, especially if you're wanting to dive into sacred feminine work, which is really where my Red Tent journey started, then we can dive deeper with that. And again, the languaging, your vocabulary is building, so the languaging is increasing, and so your ability to make stories about your own story becomes easier. It gives you more practice, more more to bounce off of each other. We may also want to look at starting to give more feedback on each other. So I thought that was quite interesting last week when I think it was just Hillary and Candace and myself, and we did a bit of feedback on some of the other charts. That might also be helpful in order to start to get a little bit more confident to then maybe you want to start looking at the lens through somebody else's chart. So maybe you don't bring your chart to the table. Maybe you bring your son, your daughter, your spouse, your whatever, that you want to maybe start looking at other charts. I mean, we could look at your chart as well, but maybe you want to add something to somebody else's. So you're starting to read other charts too of your family members and just starting to get a little bit more comfortable, because the more it's like anything, it's a muscle, you've got to practice it. And the more you start to see, that Aries might be here for me, but it might be there for you. And Mars might be here in Pisces for me, but it's there in Virgo for you. And then you start to, it just improves things as you get more confident and comfortable and practiced. So these are ideas I want you to just sit with, and maybe you can bring into our Zoom on Monday, or alternatively, we will cover those questions again the following month. But I'm just planting some seeds, because Aquarius is the sign of astrology and technology and life on other planets and that big expansive looking out. So it is a good idea for us to think, where are we expanding to next? So thank you very much for your time. Goodness, it's already 7 o'clock. So I'm going to sign off, and I will send these off to you tomorrow. And have a beautiful, well, by the time you get this, it may not be evening, but have a beautiful day.